The Christmas lights at her sister Veronica's house flashed at a frantic, almost violent pace. For most people, they were the sparkle of celebration. For 6-year-old Sophia, they were needles piercing her eyes. The mixture of loud conversations, forced laughter, and the clinking of cutlery created a wall of sound that drowned her out. Sophia was huddled under the dining room table, a small refuge amid the chaos. Her fragile, tiny hands covered her ears with a force that her little arms could barely sustain. A low hum, a moan that was almost a vibration, escaped from her throat. She was falling apart, piece by piece, and no one seemed to notice. Suddenly, the noise stopped. Not the party noise, but hers. A high-pitched scream, a cry for help that pierced the air. Her Aunt Veronica turned abruptly, her festive smile melting into a mask of pure irritation. She marched over to the table and, instead of bending down, shouted into the void under the tablecloth, "Sophia, that's enough. You want to ruin everyone's evening with this drama of yours?" The silence that followed was more deafening than the scream. Isabella, her mother, watched the scene with her heart frozen. But what destroyed her was what happened next. Nothing. Her brother-in-law took another bite of turkey. Her own mother adjusted her glasses and continued chewing. The party went on, the food was served, the glasses clinked, as if an invisible child wasn't breaking right there, at everyone's feet. What city are you watching us from right now? Tell us in the comments. And to make sure you don't miss stories like this one which need to be told, subscribe to our channel. Your subscription helps us give a voice to those who are not heard. 3 days later, the silence in Isabella's house was heavy, dense. The only light came from the screen of her laptop, where she was researching, for the 1000th time, auditory hypersensitivity in children. Daniel, her husband, found her in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, her face bathed in tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. He hugged her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. For a long time they stayed like that, just feeling each other's weight. "I can't get the image out of my head, Danny," she whispered, her voice hoarse from holding back tears. Veronica's face, it wasn't just anger, it was contempt, as if Sophia were a nuisance, a problem that I insist on taking with me everywhere. She turned to him, her eyes pleading. But the worst part wasn't her scream. The worst part was everyone else's silence. My mother, she looked at me, Danny. She saw me frozen, she saw the terror in my eyes, and then she just turned away and took some more salad, as if our daughter and I didn't exist, as if her pain was an inconvenience at Christmas dinner. Isabella walked away, pacing back and forth in the shadows. I feel like a terrible mother. I should have picked her up and left right then and there. I should have yelled back, defended my child. But I froze. I stood there watching them devour that dinner while my daughter fell apart. What kind of mother does that? I exposed her to that. I took her into the lion's den because I wanted, for one night, to feel like we had a normal family. She stopped in front of the window, staring into the darkness outside. Ever since Sophia was born, I feel like I'm in a silent war with them. Every disapproving look when she doesn't eat what they offer her. Every sigh of impatience when she has a meltdown at the supermarket. Every piece of advice that is actually a veiled criticism of my motherhood. She's too spoiled. You need to set limits. In my day, that was solved with a good spanking. They don't see it. They refuse to see it. To them, autism is an excuse I made up for a spoiled daughter. Daniel pulled her into a hug, this time a tight one. A hug that tried to put the pieces of her back together. You're not a bad mother, Bella. You're the best mother Sophia could have. You didn't freeze out of weakness, you froze out of shock, out of pain, because you couldn't believe that the people you love could be so cruel. But they were. Isabella sobbed, despair finally breaking through all barriers. They were, and I don't know how I'm going to look them in the face again. I don't know how I'm going to explain to my daughter when she's older that her own family treated her like she was nothing. That outburst wasn't just about the party. It was about years of invalidation, of loneliness, of fighting alone for understanding in a desert of indifference. It was the cry of a lioness wounded, not by an unknown predator but by her own pride. The Christmas party was not an isolated incident. It was the culmination of years of false hope and disastrous advice, each one a small death to Isabella's spirit. When Sophia was 3 and her autism diagnosis was confirmed, Isabella's first reaction was to seek support from her family. She naively believed that a medical report, a piece of paper with technical terms, would be the key to understanding. It was her first big mistake. Her mother, Helena, a woman who had always valued appearances above all else, leafed through the neurologist's report with her fingertips as if the paper were contaminated. Autism? Isabella, please. That's just a fad now. Everyone who's a little different gets a label. The girl is just shy. Stop being so overprotective. She needs more contact with other children. The false hope that her grandmother would become an ally vanished like smoke. Worse, Helena began a subtle campaign to cure her granddaughter. She brought calming teas made from dubious herbs, recommended holistic therapists who promised to realign the child's chakras, and insisted that the problem was the lack of a stricter religious routine in the family's life. Veronica, her sister, was even more direct. With a degree in business administration, she felt qualified to give her opinion on neurodevelopment. The problem, Bella, is that you give in to her every whim. She cries, you pick her up. She doesn't want to eat, you do something else. It's a power game. I read a book about it. You need to show her who's boss. She gave Isabella a book by a controversial author who preached almost military-style parenting, based on ignoring crying and applying punishments. Isabella tried, for one hellish week, to follow the advice. The result was a terrified Sophia, who began to have panic attacks whenever her mother approached, and an Isabella consumed by guilt, crying in secret in the bathroom. The pain of seeing fear in her own daughter's eyes was a wound she knew would never completely heal. There was also the phase of social pressure. At family gatherings, Sophia's cousins, who were loud and outgoing, were always held up as examples to follow. Look at Lucas, what a smart boy. He interacts with everyone. You need to get Sophia involved in more activities. Soccer, judo, she needs to loosen up. Each comparison was a blow. They didn't understand that forcing Sophia into a group activity, with noise, physical contact, and complex social rules, was like pushing her into an abyss. The attempt to enroll her in swimming lessons, strongly suggested by an uncle, ended in such a severe crisis that the teacher, frightened, asked that she not be brought back. Isabella felt the humiliation burning on her face as she carried her daughter, who was trembling and sobbing, out of the club under the pitying and judgmental stares of the other parents. Each failed attempt to fit into the mold that the family expected was another nail in the coffin of her hope. They didn't want to help Sophia. They wanted Sophia to disappear, giving way to a normal child who wouldn't embarrass them. And Isabella's pain was twofold: the pain of seeing her daughter suffer, and the pain of realizing that her family's love was conditional. The problem is that there were no absolute villains in that story. Just broken people trapped in their own limitations. Veronica, the screaming aunt, was not a monster. She was a woman who had always competed with Isabella. As children, they competed for grades. As teenagers, for attention. Now, as adults, the competition was for the perfect life. Veronica had an impeccable home, children who got straight A's, and a magazine cover marriage. Sophia, with her unpredictability and intense needs, was an affront to this universe of controlled perfection. Her scream at the party did not come solely from the irritation of the moment. It came from a place of fear, the fear that her niece's imperfection could somehow spill over into her immaculate life. It was an act of self-preservation, selfish and cruel, but born of deep insecurity. Helena, the grandmother, was a product of a generation that swept problems under the rug. In her world, there was no room for depression, anxiety, or autism. There was sadness, nervousness, and difficulty. Children, admitting that her granddaughter had a permanent neurological condition, would be admitting a flaw in the family line, a stain on the legacy she worked so hard to keep polished. Her silence during Veronica's assault was not pure malice, but cowardly paralysis. To intervene would mean taking sides, acknowledging the conflict, and worst of all, admitting that there was a real and undeniable problem. Continuing to eat the turkey was her way of pretending that normality had not been shattered, a desperate act to maintain the illusion that her family was still perfect. The most complex conflict, however, was happening inside Isabella's own home. Daniel, her husband, was a good man. He loved his daughter with palpable tenderness, but for a long time he was in denial, a denial different from Helena's, more subtle. He accepted the diagnosis, but believed that with the right therapy and the right encouragement, Sophia could be fixed. He threw himself into his work, financing the best clinics and the most expensive specialists in a frantic search for a solution. What did Dr. Petrov say? And the new speech therapist, Dr. Schmidt, has she seen any improvement? He didn't see his daughter. He saw a project to be completed. The fight between them was silent, fought between the lines. Isabella fought for Sophia's acceptance as she was. Daniel fought to turn her into what he thought she should be. The Christmas party was a turning point for him as well. Seeing the raw pain on Isabella's face in the kitchen, hearing his mother-in-law's account of the silence, something inside him broke. He realized that in his search for a cure, he was also, in a way, invalidating his daughter and leaving Isabella to fight alone in the most important trench, that of emotional acceptance. The conflict was not between good and evil, but between different types of pain and different ways of dealing with a reality that no one had chosen. The turning point did not happen with a bang, but with a click. The sound of Isabella's mouse in the early hours of the morning after her outburst to Daniel. She closed the 27 tabs she had open on therapy and opened a new one. Support groups for parents of autistic children. That click was an act of surrender and at the same time of rebellion. She was surrendering to the idea that she couldn't change her family, but rebelling against the loneliness they had imposed on her. That same week, Daniel came home early. He didn't ask about therapists. Instead, he brought a large box. Inside was a Galaxy projector and state-of-the-art noise-canceling headphones. "I read," he said, his voice low, almost shy. "I read about sensory overload. I think I've been so focused on getting you to talk that I forgot to try to listen to your silence." That night, they didn't turn on the TV. They lay down on the living room floor with Sophia and projected stars and nebulae onto the ceiling. For the first time in months, Sophia wasn't in her corner, but lying between them, her eyes fixed on the private universe spinning slowly above them. She didn't say anything, but her little hand sought out Isabella's and held it. It was the first piece of the puzzle falling into place. The next change was more drastic. On Sunday, Isabella called her mother. "Mom, I need to tell you something. I love you, but we're not going to Sunday lunches for a while, and I don't want to hear any more advice about Sophia. What we need from you, the only thing, is for you to love her as she is. If you can't do that, then we need space." The silence on the other end of the line was long and heavy, but for the first time, it didn't intimidate Isabella. It was a silence she didn't need to fill. She hung up the phone, feeling a relief she hadn't felt in years. It was the pain of amputation, but also the freedom of getting rid of a diseased limb. The real turning point came from an unexpected place. In the online support group, a mother shared an article about nonverbal communication and the importance of validating a child's narrow interests. Sophia was obsessed with clothing labels. She could spend hours lining them up by color, texture, size. To the family, it was strange behavior. To Isabella, it was a source of concern. Following the article's advice one afternoon, instead of trying to distract Sophia, Isabella sat down on the floor next to her. She took an empty shoebox and some labels she had saved. Without saying a word, she began to glue the labels onto the box, creating a mosaic of colors and fabrics. Sophia stopped what she was doing and watched. Her eyes, usually distant, focused on her mother. Then, slowly, she picked up a blue silk label and handed it to Isabella. It wasn't a word. It wasn't a hug. It was an invitation to enter her world on her terms. At that moment, Isabella understood. The cure wasn't for Sophia. The cure was for her. She needed to be cured of her need for normality, of her expectation of love manifesting itself in a conventional way. The turning point wasn't finding the solution to autism. It was finding the key to her daughter's heart. The big battles gave way to a succession of small, glorious victories. The box of labels, which they christened the treasure box, became a ritual. Every afternoon they spent a few minutes together, sticking in new acquisitions. It was during one of these rituals that the first big victory happened. Sophia, who rarely made eye contact, looked directly into Isabella's eyes, pointed to a bright red sticker, and said a single word, "Pretty." The sound was a little nasal, almost a whisper, but to Isabella, it sounded like a symphony. She didn't cry. She just smiled, a smile so wide that her face hurt, and replied, "Yes, daughter, it's very pretty." Daniel also had his victory. He transformed the garage, a place of clutter and dust, into a sensory gym. He installed a fabric swing where Sophia could wrap herself up like in a cocoon, a small climbing wall with colorful supports and a ball pit. At first, Sophia hesitated, but Daniel didn't push her. He would get on the swing and read a book. He would jump in the ball pit and laugh to himself. One day, he was lying in the ball pit when he felt a movement. Sophia had entered silently and was sitting in the opposite corner, sinking her hands into the plastic balls with an expression of pure concentration. He said nothing. He just kept reading. That shared presence, without demands, without expectations, was his victory. It was proof that he was finally learning her language. The greatest revenge, however, came in a subtle and unexpected way. On Sophia's 7th birthday, Isabella and Daniel decided not to have a party. Instead, they took her to a butterfly garden, a quiet, warm place full of silent colors. Sophia was amazed. She walked among the plants, her finger outstretched, waiting for a butterfly to land. And one did. A large blue butterfly landed on her index finger. Sophia stood still, her face transfigured by serene amazement. Daniel, who had become an amateur photographer to capture these moments, captured the scene. The photo was spectacular. His daughter's profile, her eyes shining with admiration, the blue butterfly with its wings spread on her finger. Isabella posted the photo on her social media, something she rarely did. The caption was simple: 7 years of our butterfly, flying free, in her own time, in her own sky. Within hours, the photo went viral among friends and acquaintances. And then came the comment from Veronica: "What a beautiful photo. She looks so happy. I miss you all so much." The comment was not an apology, nor was it a request for forgiveness, but it was an acknowledgement, a small white flag raised in the distance. Isabella stared at the comment for a long time. She felt no anger. She felt no triumph. She felt only the confirmation that she had chosen the right path. Her daughter's happiness, genuine and radiant in that photo, was the only answer that mattered. It was the sweetest victory of all. One night, months after the butterfly's birthday, Isabella was putting away Sophia's clean clothes. As she folded a small t-shirt, she found a satin label with a small bear printed on it. Automatically, she cut it out carefully and placed it in a small box in the drawer, to later take it to the treasure box. It was an automatic, instinctive gesture, and it was at that moment that the depth of the transformation hit her with the force of a wave. She sat on the edge of Sophia's bed, who was sleeping peacefully, hugging a stuffed dinosaur. Isabella looked at her own reflection in the wardrobe mirror. The woman staring back at her was different from the one who had frozen at the Christmas party. The look was no longer one of panic or despair, but of watchful calm. There were new lines around her eyes, but they were lines of laughter and focus, not anguish. She realized that for years, her mission had been to try to fit Sophia into the world. She wanted her daughter to speak so that others would understand her, to eat so that others would accept her, to play so that others would validate her. All her energy was focused outward, in a desperate battle against the judgment of others. The Christmas party, with its explicit cruelty, was not a curse. It was a brutal blessing. It forced her to turn the wheel, to stop looking outside and start looking inside. Inside her home, inside her daughter, inside herself. Her mission changed. It was no longer about fitting Sophia into the world. It was about creating a world for Sophia. A world where clothing labels were not strange, but treasures. Where silence was not an emptiness to be filled, but a form of communication. Where love did not need to be said, only shown in the act of projecting a galaxy onto the ceiling or building a gym in the garage. She realized that autism wasn't the enemy. The enemy was ignorance. The enemy was expectation. The enemy was her own desire to have a normal life, a concept she now saw as a mirage, a fiction. What was normal anyway? A family that smiles for photos but devours itself in silence? A child who obeys all the rules but hides who she really is? Her normality, her happiness was there, in that room. It was in the soft sound of her daughter's breathing, in the collection of dinosaurs arranged by size next to her bed, in the box of labels that was worth more than any jewel. Isabella understood that accepting Sophia did not mean giving up on her. On the contrary, it meant loving her with a ferocity and intelligence she did not know she possessed. It meant becoming a translator of worlds, an engineer of safe environments, an archaeologist of small joys. She was no longer mourning the daughter she imagined she would have. She was celebrating, with every fiber of her being, the extraordinary daughter she actually had. And that realization brought not only peace, it brought immense power. The power of not needing anyone else's approval. 2 years passed. Life did not become a fairy tale. Sophia still had difficult days. There were meltdowns in supermarket aisles, refusals to leave the house, moments of frustration that ended in tears for both mother and daughter. The pain did not disappear. It just changed in nature. It was no longer the pain of loneliness and misunderstanding, but the pain of growing up, of effort, of navigating a world that is not always kind. The difference was that now, Isabella and Daniel had tools. They had the swing pod, the headphones, the treasure box. They had each other, united not by denial, but by a real partnership. The invitation to Veronica's youngest son's christening arrived in an elegant envelope. For a moment, the ghost of the Christmas party haunted the kitchen. Isabella held the invitation, the thick paper cold in her hands. Daniel watched her from across the table. "We don't have to go," he said, his voice firm. Isabella looked out the window. Sophia was in the backyard lying on the grass watching the ants march in a perfect line. She looked peaceful. "No, we're going," Isabella said, surprising herself. "But we're going on our own terms." On the day of the christening, they arrived late, missing the noisy ceremony at the church. They went straight to the reception, which was being held in an airy hall with a large garden. Isabella was carrying a backpack. Inside were Sophia's headphones, a tablet with her favorite games, and a bag with her favorite cookies. As soon as they entered, Veronica came to meet them, her face a mixture of surprise and anxiety. "Bella, you came!" "We came to give our nephew a kiss," replied Isabella, with a calmness that diffused any tension. They stayed for exactly 45 minutes. Sophia gave her baby cousin an awkward hug, ate her cookies sitting on a bench in the garden, and when the noise started to increase, she put on her headphones and focused on her tablet. Helena, the grandmother, approached. She looked at Sophia, then at Isabella. There was sadness in her eyes. "She's so big," Helena said in a low voice. "You're a good mother, Isabella." It was the first time she had ever said that. It didn't heal the wounds of the past, but it was soothing. When Sophia began to show the first signs of tiredness, rocking her body back and forth, Isabella got up. "Well, we're going to go. It was great to see everyone. No drama, no excuses." Veronica accompanied her to the door. "Thank you for coming, really." "He's beautiful, Vero, congratulations," said Isabella. As they got into the car, Daniel held Isabella's hand. "That was the most powerful thing I've ever seen," he said. It wasn't revenge. It was a declaration of independence. They no longer needed to hide. They had learned to exist in the world while protecting their own. Hope did not lie in a future without challenges, but in the certainty that they had the strength and love to face any of them. Together. Happiness was not the absence of pain, but the ability to find joy, peace, and connection even in the midst of it. And that they had in abundance. They no longer needed the world to understand. They had become each other's world, and that universe was vast enough. Because not all love speaks the same language, but all true love learns to listen to silence. If this story touched you in any way, if you've ever felt invisible or fought for someone you love to be seen, leave your like and comment. Subscribe to the channel so that more voices can be heard. Sometimes sharing a story is the most powerful way to say to someone, "You are not alone."